Hey, Mattie, what are we talking about today?
Pre-med, Michelle, particularly applying pre-med. We recently did a discussion of computer science and how to get in. This time we're going over my views on what and why you should be applying pre-med, like the application realm itself, and how to do so. You ready?
Oh, yeah, this should be interesting.
Okay, so when we talked about computer science, Michelle, that we had two episodes. The first was kind of my overall views on what computer science means in 2025, and the second half was talking about like how to get in. We're gonna do a similar thing here. Only it'll be one episode because I don't have as many views on me pre-med, honestly. I guess if I didn't even put this in my outline, but we're talking about like what pre-med means to me. I would say what my takes is I believe it's currently too difficult in America to become a doctor.
Really?
Yeah. So this isn't even in my outline, but I'm realizing like talking about what pre-med means to me is I think there absolutely is a strategy for pre-med when I work with my students. And when they're trying to go to med school, I'm very and we'll get to like what that strategy is, both in the application and also like I think it's really important to go to an elite private school if you want to go to a med school kind of thing. I overall just feel that it should be hard. Like it should be
Mm-hmm.
difficult to become a doctor in America.
True.
However, I think it's too difficult in that there are multiple bottlenecks, and the big one, I think the biggest bottleneck is actually getting into med school. And I have personal experience with students like growing up, I had friends in college, they didn't get into med school. Like it's very real.
Mm-hmm.
And they often end up doing something else or going to Caribbean med school, which doesn't work well. I don't think that's really as much a thing anymore. That was kind of on the streets like a decade ago. But I believe in America there are many, many, many people who are good employees, they're good computer scientists or businessmen or what have you, that would instead be very good doctors, except they got weeded out somewhere in the med school application process. And
Okay.
like that would be okay, except we don't have enough doctors in America. Like there's a
That's
chronic
true.
shortage,
Yeah.
and I my understanding is that shortage is being filled by people who come from basically outside the country and come in here. And it would not shock me if they come from places where it's not quite as difficult to become a doctor. So we already have an issue where we're having to import doctors to like fill gaps, and that's my general thoughts on it. Like I don't know, like the process itself makes enough sense to me. It doesn't like computer science where things are radically like always changing. Like the game is the game.
Mm-hmm.
But that's my if you want to know my overall take on it is I wish it wasn't so crazy because we need doctors, I guess. But
Right.
that's my big view on it. But that leads to my views in particular when students are coming to me as high school juniors, and they're looking at school. They want to be a doctor, and the speech I give them is first, I believe where a student attends undergraduate university is extremely important in regards to their ability to attend med school, in particular, like a high end med school they would like to go to.
Mm-hmm.
There is a thought online, or I've certainly read it, that it doesn't matter where you go to undergrad because these med schools don't care. And you just like, if you just do the work and have what you need, you'll get in. And that would be great, except I have a chart. Actually, it's two charts that I'm going to showcase. And every single potential pre-med that I meet with, I show this chart pretty quickly on these two charts. And it's from the website College Transitions, which actually has some cool stuff on it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know anything about them. I just found this chart, and like many of my charts, I believe they also are a college admissions consulting agency. I can't, I
Right.
can't, I can't, I can't speak to anything else about them except I like this chart. But and their SEO is good, I guess. I think I probably found on Google. What they did, and this might be oversimplifying. I believe they basically went to LinkedIn and they searched doctor, they searched MD, and then or they had a robot do it. And then what they did is they found every single MD on LinkedIn. And then that same thing, they went and basically backtracked where that doctor or yeah, I basically yeah, like where that or resident wherever they were, where they went to undergraduate university.
Okay.
And that led to two separate charts. So the first one is basically on LinkedIn, as when this was made, there are 1,742 current current doctors basically who, yeah, MD graduates, so people who graduated from med school that went to Harvard. There's 1,269 who went to Stanford. There's 998 who went to Columbia, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And what you see pretty quickly is it's kind of what you would expect, I guess, in theory. Is that like this chart says to me is that if you want to go to med school, Harvard is probably your best bet, which both sounds obvious, but also is directly opposed to the idea that it doesn't matter where you go. And quite honestly, if it really didn't matter, This chart should be instead actually dominated by Florida State. It should be Michigan State. It
Mhm.
should be one of the biggest schools in the country, Penn State, right? So they're
Okay.
like if it really didn't matter, if it was just as like neutral, this entire chart, in my understanding, should be dominated by the largest undergraduate schools in the country, because that would make like Harvard accepts has around 2,000 students per class. Well, Florida State has more like I guess probably 9 to 12,000 students, and you see Michigan here, you see Berkeley
Yeah.
here, UNC is here. Yep,
UCLA.
yep, UCLA, and then you keep going, you get San Diego. Those are your state schools that are
Mhm.
presented. It's also strange that those are the ones that are here because in theory it should again there are more students. It should just be Florida State. Like it should be the biggest schools. And
Right.
UC San Diego is not the biggest state school in the country. It's I would say like the fifth or sixth best state school underneath the other five that are also represented on this chart. So that's where this chart like really seems to fly against the idea that it doesn't matter where you go kind of thing, because I and this is why I show it to my pre-med students, and they go, "Ah," and they ask for the link so they can stare at it, and it's pretty I think it's pretty convincing, right?
Yeah, it is.
And also just it goes in the order of the US News World Report. It goes Harvard,
Pretty
Stanford,
much.
Columbia, Yale. Then you're in kind of the second tier. We got Penn, Duke, Cornell, and then you keep going. And there are some interesting ones. Cornell's up here. Then you got, yeah, Princeton is only down here, I guess. It's like it's not it's not just the US News World Report rankings. But then you have schools, it kind of is like that's
Mhm.
what I noticed reading is it's and then it cuts off right at University of Chicago, Case Western, like kind of the end of the line where we are working with students in the first place.
Right.
There's Case Western, Virginia, and there's Texas down. So that's the first part. Is I just think it matters, and I think it matters possibly more than any other major. Like maybe like there'll be a third version of this for finance. There's the three like computer science, pre med, and finance are the three that I see very differently. But really, it's finance and pre med that I really think it matters where you go, because it like that is you're feeding into something else. So that's step one. There's actually a second chart on here, which is the top feeder rankings adjusted for undergraduate enrollment. You know what per capita means, Michelle?
Not related to this, I don't think.
Okay, so per capita it's the number of graduates versus how many students went to that school. So the
Okay.
idea is that Harvard has around 2,000 students per class, whereas Cornell has more like 6 or 7,000.
Mhm.
So per capita, you basically divide the Cornell numbers like by 3 compared to what Harvard does. Whereas UC Berkeley has 12,000, so you're going to
Okay.
divide that by 6 times as much. You divide that by 6 to make it the same as Harvard, if that makes sense. So it's the number
Okay.
of graduates, how many med school graduates versus how many students went to the undergrad in the first place. And it's a very similar list you'll find, except for one exception, where you still have Stanford, Harvard, Yale, Columbia, Duke, Princeton. Princeton jumps here. Two big differences is one is you start seeing your liberal arts colleges pop up, which I think,
Mhm.
like in a fair, well, that makes sense. Amherst is now here. Haverford's here, Williams is here, Pomona. So that's the first difference. The second is I can't help but notice that our giant state schools, even our Berkeley's, UCLA's, are no longer presented in any way whatsoever. Which is what leads
Right.
to point two is in order, I prefer sending pre-med students to elite privates, then non-elite privates, then elite publics, then non-elite publics. And this is opposed to my normal kind of idea in which I would probably be elite privates, then elite publics, then non-elite publics, then non-elite privates. That would be the order I would send students, my normal like every other student. This
Uh-huh.
one is elite privates, then non-elite privates, then elite publics, then non-elite publics. And that is because if we go in well, elite privates are good still, yeah. And I consider elite private in your top 20 schools; those are well represented. Non-elite privates, that's where you get schools like Emory here. I would say is non-elite. I hope that's not too controversial. A lot of liberal arts colleges like Wellesley, Wesleyan,
Mhm.
Oberlin. I consider most liberal arts colleges non-elite. According to this chart, that is kind of the secondary tier, and that's my experience. I went to Tulane University, which is a non-elite private in every way whatsoever. And what a lot of non-elite privates have going for them is basically, if you go to a non-elite private like Emory or Tulane, what you're trying to do is get into their own med school, and that was the case when I was at Tulane. Is there were good number of pre-med students, very good students, that they were there because they wanted to go to Tulane medicine. The
Okay.
way I describe it is what's good about an elite private is, and this is conjecture, but what's good about an elite private is that if you go there, the rules are pretty well defined. I think they make it pretty clear what GPA you want, like what you need to be doing. And if
Mhm.
you can hang with whatever the rules are, I don't know if sale is fair, but you pretty easily get into like a med school and hopefully be another aspect, like you hopefully get into the med school connected to the elite undergraduate university. It's really like this
Ah,
chart also
okay.
has what these schools tend to feed into more than anything, and you will find that more often than not that they are feeding into their own med school at a pretty
Yeah.
good level. Whereas if you want to go to Harvard Med or Yale Med, which many people do, like you are likely going to want to go to Harvard or Yale or Stanford kind of thing, like in the first place. So like, but if you basically if you play the game correctly, you get into med school. If you play it really well, you get into an elite med school, and like you will not get to tell. No one is arguing that an elite med school is it's all the same. It doesn't matter where you go to med school. Let's say you end up in the Caribbean, like my friend did. I don't know how that worked out. But then you get non-elite privates, and as I understand those, it's probably actually a bit easier to get like the grades you need in non-elite private because it's not as competitive.
Mhm.
However, even if you do, there's no guarantee of what's going to happen because you are gambling on trying to get into that school's private school or that school's med school. But in short of that is I just don't know how many people are jumping from Tulane undergrad to Harvard Med or to MIT, to
Right.
Stanford. I don't doesn't seem very likely. And because of that, you are kind of just out in the wilderness otherwise. Whereas I bet it's much easier to get into, I don't know, I bet it's not like I bet if you go to Cornell, you can get into Tulane medicine a lot easier than the opposite kind of thing.
Yeah, that makes
So,
sense.
and then we get into elite publics. This is maybe the controversial one. This one is a lot of conjecture, but also elite publics, it's the worst of both worlds where, so I mentioned elite privates, like it's pretty hard to get your A's, like it's competitive, but like if you do, it works. Non-elite privates, it's probably easier to keep things together, but like there's no guarantees. Elite public schools, you get the worst of both worlds where it is incredibly competitive. I know people at UC Berkeley doing pre-med one or another, and it's just miserable. They're constantly weeding students out.
Mm.
Even if you do like hang out, you do compete. My buddy Brian, I always bring him up. Like he graduated, I think first or second in his class at UCLA undergrad for pre med, and he ended
Mhm.
up at UCLA med, which is pretty good, But he tells
Yeah.
me is like if I'd just gone to Cornell, I could have gotten into like much. And he said it was the worst decision of his life going to UCLA for pre med, and I
Oh,
stand by
man.
that. And I just that this one is I know enough people who've gone to Berkeley or UCLA pre med or that path and
Mhm.
just horror stories in a way I don't hear at other places. But then even if you do survive, and it's very difficult, like there is no like UCLA doesn't have the same connections to your elite medical schools on the East Coast that your Ivy League schools will have. Like that's so
Right.
it's a nightmare on both regards. Is it's just not very. And then also it's like non-elite publics. Well, I don't really know that because I don't think I've ever sent a student to a non-elite public for pre med, but it just makes sense that would be show me like all the kids from UC Merced pre-med that are crushing it.
Right.
I don't this chart this chart will be linked and I'm scrolling through it, it'll be shown. If someone wants to tell me I'm totally wrong, please explain why using this own chart, like how I'm misinterpreting it, because this is the chart that I basically use to define my argument when talking to pre-med students, and every single one of them they get kind of depressed looking at it, and then they kind of do what I want to do afterwards. So like that's why this chart is based, but that's how I feel.
Yeah.
So what that means is when I'm working with students, I'm trying to get them into the most elite private schools in the country. And to be fair, that's usually kind of the case you found with like all students. But it matters a lot more to me. Whereas if you're applying liberal arts or there's a lot, yeah, like I don't feel this way about most subjects, right? I don't have the same edge where it really is important where
Mhm.
you go. Okay, so that leads to how we do get students in. And this is the title of the piece, the title of the podcast. Pre-med, Michelle, is not a major, and
Right.
this is a piece I wrote multiple years ago, but it's still very much important. The number one mistake that students make when applying for pre-med is that they they basically have their extracurriculars and they write about wanting to be doctors.
Yeah.
And there are many a personal statement out there about how they were inspired to help others and how they want or how their parent does it or what have you, and how they now want to continue on and become a doctor for whatever I'm sure altruistic reasons they have.
Mhm.
That's a really bad essay, and I think it really does not work at the undergraduate level. So the problem is that pre-med, you are not when you're applying as an undergraduate, you're applying to undergraduate, you're not applying to med school.
Yeah.
You're applying to be a biologist or a chemist or a neuroscience major. If you want to be like really sassy, you could be applying English, but you're going to do pre-med itself, which I don't think you should do. Pre-med, what it actually is it's a series of academic requisites. So
Mhm.
when you're doing pre-med, what you're actually doing is filling out like checking a bunch of boxes in order to qualify for med school. That is on the back end. That's when you're actually there. And really you're only actually did pre-med when it comes time to apply. Like it's almost like it is not what you are inherently at the school for. Instead, you
Right.
are at the school for biology or chemistry or whatever it happens to be. Similarly, like, yeah, these schools don't offer medical activities or extracurriculars for you. What it basically means is when you're applying, you are not applying to be pre med. You are applying the major you have selected or you are applying you're
Yes.
going to do. And that mindset is once I bring it up with students, they go, "Oh yeah, that makes sense," and it leads to a much more logical and successful application.
Mhm.
But you have to know that, like, you have to have me in a chair explaining. It's like, yeah, you're not
Right.
applying pre med. Like, it doesn't. So how do we do that? How do we do that? With my students, I 95% ignore their medical interests in favor of covering the actual academic major they are applying. And I do hope that people find this and be like, "Oh my god, he's right," because it could be a little bit of a bummer because usually these students will have, I guess, medical extracurriculars. They'll have shadowed
Yes,
doctors, they'll
definitely.
have worked in hospitals, they often have that they have a parent or whatever, and like and that's okay, I guess, but we basically ignore it. Like I don't write many essays with students on their actual medical work, or if we do, it's very tangential to like the science behind it. Instead, I ask them very clearly, what major are you applying? And it's usually bio, chem, or biochem, or the three most, sometimes neuro,
Right.
and I go, okay, cool. So understand that you are not a doctor. You're a biologist, you're a chemist, you're a biochemist. And we go from there. What that means is the part where it gets a little tricky is we then have to figure out why they want to do bio or chemistry or
Yes.
biochem or neuro that is not just because that's how I get to med school.
Exactly.
That's the tricky part. And
Right.
we need a term, or I need to find out a term that's it's not lying, but it's something that I do with students quite a bit, which is we like creatively reinterpret their present, past, or future. That is, it's like I guide them towards a either yeah, like a newfound understanding of why they have, do, and will do anything they do.
Yes.
Yeah, because it's not lying. It's not lying. It feels like it sometimes, but that is probably the hardest part. And I guess what often happens is often it's just a matter of like, well, what have you achieved in biochemistry, biochem? And
Right.
they almost 99 times, it's not like I'm getting students who only have like medical stuff. They always do have like the core academic subjects. And I go, great. So begin our work together, really focusing on that subject matter and really coming to an understanding of what it meant to them and why they do that. Then we kind of repurpose that information to like a greater goal that is that. And if
Yeah.
that goal is kind of medically, I think I'm thinking about students in the last couple years is like there's a student who was into like drug he wanted to be like a drug addiction like substance abuse kind of doctor, addiction
Mhm.
medicine. And we go, okay, so we just kind of cut the medical part out that, and he was now doing he wanted to do biology. He's like, all right, so it goes back to
Yeah.
the X and Y. It's like, what is the biology of like drug addiction? And you could talk about like medical issues, but in a more general sense, not as if like you were actually going to fix them as a doctor, but you can
Mhm.
still talk about like what is the biology of addiction, like how's it going down? And that's what leads back to backing up your major in a way that it does. It requires a little bit of, like, reconsideration of, like, why a student might care about it because it cannot just be, because I want to go be a doctor and fix it. Instead, it has to be a much more ground level
Exactly.
understanding. Where this really tends to be helpful, I guess, is when it comes to the why school stuff, I guess, because 'cause I'm building towards that, and the reason that I fell for this trap, it was 2020, like, I had a lot of future doctors, I didn't understand it. I was like, "Okay, let's be doctors." Probably 2019
Mm.
too. The really nasty part is you could totally get away with it or think you're getting away with it when it comes to the personal statement and the supplements. There's nothing stopping a student from writing about doctor stuff, like why they want to be a doctor, and it makes sense and it's powerful and it's real. But when I knew something was up was when it came to the why school essays, because I had multiple students come back to me. There are no med school extracurriculars available at the undergraduate level. They very much
Yeah.
lock you out of them because those are not for you. Those are for med students, and
Mhm.
that's like any student who's like gonna apply medicine. Like, if you don't believe me, I recommend you like start with the Y school stuff. Like, okay, if you think that like you can get away with it, go try to find information on like how you could actually be a doctor and what you could say you're excited about as an undergraduate student, and you will find what I have found is that there is a hard ceiling on it that doesn't exist in other majors. Whereas your average finance guy or business or history or whatever, there's lots of stuff that like is probably like for or by the graduate school. I found that like you can just go watch if you want, and like
Yeah.
And that stuff's not like the best Y school stuff, but like it's okay. It plays. Like I'm sure you found stuff with students that is like technically a grad school thing, but like they're allowed to go check
Like a
out.
seminar or something,
Sure,
yeah.
seminars
Yeah.
yeah, chats and group discussions, whatever. That no, like none of that
That's
stuff
so
is for
true, yeah.
yeah, well, yeah, and you haven't had to really dig with students because like they're just trying to find bio stuff, which you can find with them. But that is what I recommend if you don't believe me, is go look for that stuff. Go look for like opportunities to be doing even things similar to what you're doing in high school. It's often easier to be doing pre-med or medical work as a high schooler than it is as an undergraduate because as a high schooler you at least have like you have like connections that will make as
Mhm.
a if you were an undergraduate bio major like the school itself will not help you, and that's why you need to pivot away from that. Yes, but what it leads to is instead, if you've built it correctly, this all goes back to the back up your major episode, is if you instead have kind of sat there and been like, okay, no medicine, fine, I'll just ignore it. Well, pick your major, written about it. When it comes to the Y school, yeah, similarly, is you are not talking about med school applications. This is a bio application all of a sudden, and
Right.
that should make it much easier and more logical with your newfound understanding of why you want to be a biologist. And again, that is the tricky part. That I keep coming back to that because I guess what it usually ends up being is we strip the MD aspect away from what they want to be doing. I often say it's like, okay, you
Yeah.
want to be a doctor, what kind of doctor you want to be. And then sometimes I'll say like, I don't know. And I'll go, well, that doesn't help in this scenario. I just want to, but if they say it's addiction medicine or I want to help, oh, cancer, I want to be I want to be a, I
Yeah.
don't know what cancer doctor is. And I go, okay, cool. We can still write about you wanting to help people with cancer. And if some of that stuff has overlap with well, you would need a med degree for that. That's okay. However, we don't really mention that part. We just kind of talk about this. It's about the science. It really is
Mhm.
about the biology or the chemistry or whatever you're doing of the issue you want to be having. And you could do that and you can be med school or medicine agnostic in a way. That's what leads to the Y school stuff, which is often a lot simpler and more logical with this newfound understanding. And yeah, sometimes there was a couple years where I would like not let students mention medicine whatsoever in the application, and I softened on that. Like it kind of be like it's wink wink nudge nudge is kind of how it feels sometimes with students, in which they are
Right.
yes often at the end of a Y school it'll be like, and yes, a lot of this will be a lot more possible once I am in med school and beyond, but that's for another chapter kind of
Right.
thing, and that's important. That these schools are not playing defense in the same way. It's not like if you mention med school they're going to throw your application in the trash. What they don't like is if you are implying that is what you are now applying
Right,
for.
that
But
makes
it's
sense.
okay. It's often at the end of a Y school, they will be like, yeah, and then as a junior or a senior, I want to take this seminar. That's what they do have in reality is they don't have any med school stuff, but they do have a lot of stuff that like if you're interested in medicine or you're considering med school, there's a lot of seminars that like will give you information about how to go to med school. Like
Mhm.
that's what they actually offer, and that's where it usually comes up is will be like when I'm a junior or senior, I want to take this seminar to like get to meet some doctors, and almost always it's like maybe I'll go to med school. I don't know. It's like yeah, like with that kind of I'll figure it out while I'm there. That works really well because that
Yes,
is
yeah.
actually what your average undergraduate is going to offer you, especially when you're an upperclassman. Are venues in which to kind of taste med school and understand what it's really like, so that you can make a more informed choice when you're there.
Mhm.
And then it ends with be like, but for now, it's all about biochem, and that's kind of
Yeah.
the mindset behind it.
But it's okay to acknowledge, like, what the end goal is.
Yeah, I don't think I'll ever have or ever will be have a student be like, and that this all culminates with me applying to med school like that. That simply, I have students come off as like probably a little bit less confident than they actually are about these things because I think it reads better. Is one thing.
Mhm.
It's almost like because they know that if they really want to get involved, they probably need to be doctors, which is like obvious. Like when talking to them, it's like yeah, and that's why I want to be sampling different opportunities in order to have a better idea. And it's like, and if I continue on this path, that's when med school will be the next option.
Okay.
But before I get there, I'm going to learn a lot more about all this information. Like that's kind of the idea.
Right, okay.
I just bring that up because I personally, a lot of my career has been really something like it is a certain way, and then probably going too far the other way, and that I say like, well, we never bring it up. And you don't. That's just not how it works. There is more flexibility. It's much more about the general. And I hope people listening to this realize that I'm totally right about how I handle this because That is the basic thing is A, it totally matters where you go, and B, you do not want to the key is what you don't want to do. Like what you do is you just kind of have a traditional like back up your major essay. What you really don't want to do is write about how much you want to help people by in medicine. Like that save that because that essay in particular, it just does not work. It's a nasty trap because while you're writing it, it can seem very like powerful and effective, and I'm sure that is the real motivation. That's why it's so important for guys like me to be like, no, 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 don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, because
Right.
honestly, it's one of the few times in which I'm saying, "Don't do that, don't do that," and I understand why someone would do that and would feel, like, good about it, or
Mhm.
like, a lot of stuff I'm saying don't do is, like, don't write about a bad breakup, like, I don't know if you did do that. I don't know what to tell you. This one is particularly insidious, I think, because
Yeah.
it very much is the mindset students have, and it does lead to pretty good content, it's like so that's the basic idea.
I guess one thing that I was going to ask is for the extracurriculars that are really like pre-med focused, for example, shadowing doctors, those have to kind of be, like you said, reframed, where it's not like I'm exploring medicine, I'm exploring like the biology behind it by shadowing these doctors or
Yeah, so that I thought about that is I feel bad when a student has a bunch of those extracurriculars because the reality is
yeah.
I tend to just bury is probably closer to truth than not. We don't like they go on the list, they go on the UC list, and yeah, like it's fine if the person is like this kid wants to go to med school, like that's okay. So you're not trying to hide it. It's yeah, if there were that would be the case. Is it would like it doesn't end up the personal statement. It likely if the students really spend a lot of time, it ends up as a supplement and we spend the vast majority of time talking about well what was the x of y, what was the biology applied here, and
Mhm.
yeah, the takeaway is this was a great bio extracurricular all along, I guess,
Yes,
is kind
okay.
of how it works. And yeah, and like if that leads into like I would yeah, well, they're working at a cancer lab, I go okay, so like what kind of bio stuff were you doing there, and
Right.
the good news is they always have an answer because like it turns out there's a reason they make you take biology and chemistry
Mhm.
and physics or what have you in order to become a doctor because it those are the building blocks of medicine. Like that's the good news.
Right.
And so that's why I don't worry too much about it. But more often than not, like I like blood drives, like
Yeah.
I yeah, option B is like it simply is not going to be about how you learn to be a better doctor. So yeah, the blood drive, if you work there, if they can't come up with any bio thing, but they really want to talk about like, okay, did you like meet anyone interesting? Like did you have like an important experience there? We go soft skills.
Mhm.
That's the key if it really is a major extracurricular, we can and will write about it. It's rarely going to be the personal statement because they shadowed a doctor and I want to write about that. But
Exactly.
within the confines of doing it, there's other stuff I'm sure that happened. If either like the technology or the science behind it, or just something they learned about the you could talk about like you could be if you're shadowing a doctor, you could talk about the organization of the work they did or something like that. So it's like something that goes beyond that they were a great
Yeah.
doctor. I want to be one too. That's what we'll focus upon. I guess it depends on the student, but or I'll just never really bring it up very much because I don't want to write about it,
Or yeah.
and then find things to do. That's the third op. Be interested in questions about this one because it's once you hear it, you kind of can't unhear it. Both aspects of it, like where you should go and what you should be doing. And yeah, if anyone wants more, I'll bring it up. But for now, I think that's two of the three big majors. Next up is finance. We'll do that one next time.
Oh, exciting.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. See you next time.
See ya.
I am now taking on students for the 2025-26 college admissions season. If you are a current junior who's looking for help specifically with their college application and essays, you should check out my website. It's collegewithmattie.com, and there you can see my services, my blog with other written posts, as well as book out a free consultation where you get a chance to chat with me and see how I might be able to help. Looking forward to meeting you.